I just found out why my mom lied about my best friend stealing from me. I haven't been the same since. I found my grandmother's rings in my mother's jewelry box, the same rings she swore she'd caught Jenna stealing 3 weeks ago. I called Jenna immediately and she drove over sobbing with relief that I finally knew the truth. Now we stood in my mother's kitchen confronting her together. How could you destroy our friendship over a complete lie? I asked while Jenna stood beside me shaking with rage. I didn't want to tell you the real reason, my mother said. I was trying to protect you from knowing what she really is. But now that you've brought her back here, I don't have a choice. My mother revealed she'd found Jenna's purple diary full of detailed sexual fantasies about my father. Pages describing what she wanted him to do to her, how she watched him sleep during our sleepovers, how she smelled his pillow when we were gone. She'd written about stealing his underwear from the laundry and touching herself in their bed when we were at work. Jenna's face went from pale to bright red as she screamed that it was private, that everyone has fantasies, that she was 19, and thoughts weren't illegal. Her voice got higher with each word. But that's not why I had to end your friendship 3 weeks ago, my mother continued. She explained she'd found her sleeping pills dissolved in my protein smoothie last weekend, the one Jenna had made me after our workout. She'd saved what was left and had my blood tested at urgent care. It came back positive for Ambien, not the melatonin Jenna would claim. She had footage from our nanny cam showing Jenna in their bedroom at 3 a.m. Friday night, standing over my father's bed in just her underwear. Every sleepover for the past 3 months, you spiked her drinks and then went to watch him sleep, sometimes for hours. Jenna was backing away now, her whole body trembling as she insisted my mother was lying, that she was framing her out of jealousy. Her hands shook violently as she grabbed my arm desperately, her nails digging into my skin. My mother then revealed she'd found dozens of pictures on Jenna's phone when she'd left it here last month. Photos of my father sleeping taken from different angles, some where she'd pulled down his sheets to expose his chest, others where she was visible in the frame touching herself. I jerked away from Jenna in disgust, feeling bile rise in my throat. He wanted me to, Jenna shouted. He came on to me first, at your birthday party 2 years ago. She was crying hysterically now, mascara streaming down her face as she claimed my father had cornered her in the garage, told her she was prettier than me, that he thought about her constantly, that he wished he'd met her first. My father walked in from the garage right then, still in his work clothes with grease under his fingernails, stopping dead when he saw all 3 of us staring at him. Jenna begged him to tell the truth about what he'd said, about the pictures he'd supposedly begged for, about the promises he'd made. My father just stared at her, then at my mother, then at the floor, saying he didn't know what she was talking about, but his hands were clenched into fists at his sides. You're lying, Jenna screamed, spit flying from her mouth. She insisted he'd promised they could be together once I went to college, that he'd texted her every night for months, that he'd said he loved her. My father denied it but still wouldn't look at anyone. His voice wavered when he said there was nothing to check on his phone, no hidden folders, no deleted messages. You kissed me in the garage at her party. You pushed me against the wall. You said you'd never felt this way. I was at the party, but I never— Stop lying! Jenna cut him off, her voice raw from screaming. My mother stared at my father with ice in her voice. Is any of this true? He said Jenna was clearly disturbed, pointing to the diary, the pills, the pictures as evidence of her delusions. But when my mother asked if he'd encouraged her in any way, the kitchen went completely silent except for the coffee maker gurgling. My father's jaw clenched and unclenched, but he said nothing. Jenna turned to me, mascara-stained face desperate, begging me to believe her. 15 years of friendship, she said. I knew who she was. We'd been through everything together. But all I could think about was every sleepover we'd had. Every time I'd felt strangely tired after she made me drinks. Every morning I'd woken up feeling wrong without knowing why. And my father, still silent, still staring at the floor like a guilty man. Did you really put something in my drinks? I asked. Your mom spiked your drink to frame me. Can't you see what she's doing? She found out about your dad and me, and this is her revenge. My mother held up lab results from a certified lab showing prescription sedatives in my blood. Jenna insisted my mother could have easily slipped me those pills herself and blamed her, that she had access to all my drinks too. I looked between my mother and my best friend of 15 years, then at my father who still wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. I didn't know who to believe anymore. My legs wouldn't move and my mouth felt full of cotton while Jenna grabbed my shoulders and shook me hard. Say something, she screamed in my face. Her spit hit my cheek, but I just stood there frozen. My mother kept the lab results steady in her hand like a weapon. My father shifted his weight from one foot to the other near the garage door. His work boots made soft scraping sounds on the tile. Jenna's sobbing got louder and more desperate. She kept begging me to believe her, to remember all our years together, to see through my mother's lies. Her fingers dug into my shoulders through my shirt. Then something snapped in her face and she shoved me backward hard. She spun around and ran for the front door, her elbow catching a kitchen chair and sending it crashing to the floor. The sound made me jump. My mother moved fast toward the phone on the counter. We need to call the police right now, she said. My father mumbled something about needing air and slipped back through the garage door. It clicked shut behind him. My knees gave out and I dropped into the nearest chair. That's when I noticed the burning pain on my arm. 4 crescent-shaped cuts from Jenna's nails were bleeding through my shirt sleeve, little drops of red spreading into the fabric. My hands shook so bad I could barely hold the paper towel I pressed against them. The blood kept coming. My mother sat down across from me and pushed the lab report closer on the table. She pointed to different parts of the paper, showing me the chain of custody seal from the urgent care center. She explained how she'd saved the smoothie in a sealed container in our freezer the second she got suspicious, how she'd driven it to the lab herself and waited while they processed it. The official stamp and signatures proved nobody could have tampered with it. My brain felt like someone had poured syrup into it. Nothing made sense. "Walk me through everything again," I said. My voice came out weird and flat. She reached under the table and pulled out a thick folder. Inside were printed screenshots of text messages, photos with timestamps circled in red marker, and a USB drive labeled with dates. She spread them out on the table like evidence in a crime show. The nanny cam footage was saved in 10-minute chunks going back 3 months. Every file name had a date and time when Jenna had been in our house for sleepovers. My mother pointed to one from 2 weeks ago showing Jenna walking down our hallway at 2:47 a.m., another from last month at 3:15 a.m. Always the same pattern. We sat there looking at all of it spread across our kitchen table. My mother picked up the phone again and started dialing. She told whoever answered that she needed to file a police report first thing tomorrow morning. She gave our address and a brief explanation about drugging and stalking. They scheduled us for 8 a.m. I sat there trying to understand that my best friend since 4th grade had been putting pills in my drinks. The next morning came too fast. We drove to the police station in silence. The building smelled like floor wax and old coffee. They put us in a small interview room with plastic chairs and a metal table. Detective Joe Stone came in carrying a yellow notepad and a tape recorder. He was maybe 50 with gray hair and tired eyes. He looked at our folder of evidence and nodded slowly as my mother explained everything. He said we had enough for harassment and trespassing charges for sure. The drugging would be assault if the district attorney agreed. He wrote down every detail in neat handwriting. The phone on the wall rang and he answered it. Ann Reddy from the urgent care center was calling to verify the lab results. She gave him the exact collection time and testing protocols they'd used. She confirmed the chain of custody was intact, and the results were real. The detective added all her information to his notes. He said he'd need to interview my father separately. That afternoon, I found my father in the garage working on his truck, even though nothing was wrong with it. "We need to talk," I said. He kept his head under the hood and said there was nothing to talk about. He insisted nothing really happened with Jenna, but his hands shook when he pulled out a cigarette and tried to light it. He dropped the lighter twice. His eyes stayed fixed on the engine like it held all the answers. "Look at me," I said. He wouldn't. That night, I sat at my desk with a notebook and started writing down every time I'd felt weird after Jenna made me something. The protein shake after our workout 2 weeks ago. The hot chocolate during movie night last month. The smoothie she'd brought me after my run 3 weeks back. The pattern went back exactly 3 months. Always Friday or Saturday when she slept over. Always drinks she made special just for me. Always waking up the next morning with my head full of fog and my body feeling heavy and wrong. The next morning, my mother was already up making coffee and laying out more evidence folders on the kitchen table when I came downstairs. She started talking immediately about hiring a private investigator and getting a lawyer and installing more cameras around the house. I told her I needed some space to think about everything myself. She kept pushing, saying we needed to move fast before Jenna could destroy any more evidence. We went back and forth for 20 minutes until I finally said she could handle the evidence stuff, but I needed to focus on keeping myself safe. She agreed, but I could tell she didn't like giving up control. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a voicemail notification from an unknown number. It was Jenna crying, so hard I could barely understand her words. She kept saying my mother was jealous and twisted, and that she had things to tell me about my father that would change everything. The message went on for 3 whole minutes with her begging me to meet her somewhere private. My hands shook as I took a screenshot of the notification. I wanted so badly to call her back and demand she explain everything, but I forced myself to block the number instead. I saved the voicemail file to send to Detective Stone later. 3 days after the kitchen confrontation, Detective Stone came by to collect the nanny cam memory card. He wore the same tired expression as before and carried an evidence bag with a chain of custody form attached. He explained the forensic team would need a few days to go through all the footage, but he seemed confident we had a solid case building. He asked if there had been any contact attempts from Jenna, and I showed him the voicemail. He nodded and made more notes in his yellow pad. 2 days later, he called to say the preliminary review was done. The footage showed Jenna entering my parents' bedroom at least 8 different times over the past 3 months. Every single timestamp matched a night she'd stayed over for our sleepovers. Some entries were as short as 10 minutes, but others lasted over an hour. He said they were still reviewing to see if there were more. By the end of that first week, everything fell apart completely. My mother gave my father an ultimatum to either move out or she'd file a restraining order. He packed a duffel bag with work clothes and his toothbrush while she watched from the doorway with her arms crossed. He didn't say goodbye to me, just loaded his truck and drove away. The house felt wrong without him there, even though I was still angry about everything. His coffee mug sat unwashed by the sink for days. That weekend, my mother sat me down in the living room with a cup of tea. She explained she'd actually found Jenna's purple diary 2 months ago while cleaning my room for laundry. She'd been investigating quietly since then, gathering evidence without telling me because she didn't want to humiliate me without solid proof. She'd installed the nanny cam 6 weeks ago after reading the diary entries. She'd started paying attention to when I felt sick after sleepovers. She'd been building a case file in a locked drawer in her bedroom. Meanwhile, my father was sitting in his motel room going through his phone. He deleted old text messages one by one, cleared his search history, and removed photos from hidden folders. His hands moved fast like he was racing against time. He knew something might surface during the investigation, and the fear of it kept him awake, staring at the water-stained ceiling. He chain-smoked cigarettes and jumped every time his phone rang. Across town, Jenna sat in her apartment writing in a brand new diary with a black cover. She wrote page after page about how what she and my father had was real love and not some sick obsession like everyone was saying. She described how my mother had poisoned everyone against their destiny together. She drew hearts around his name and wrote about the promises he'd made to her. She convinced herself that once the truth came out, everyone would understand. During the second week after everything exploded, I had my first appointment with Yvette Howell. Her office was in a small building downtown with beige walls and a white noise machine in the waiting room. She specialized in betrayal trauma and had gray hair pulled back in a bun. She asked me to describe how I'd been feeling since the confrontation. I told her about the weird floating sensation I'd had, like I was watching everything happen from outside my body. She nodded and explained this was called dissociation, and it was my brain's way of protecting me from overwhelming emotions. We spent the whole hour just talking about that feeling and ways to ground myself when it happened. She gave me exercises to try, like naming 5 things I could see, 4 things I could touch, 3 things I could hear. The appointment left me exhausted, but also relieved to have a name for what I was experiencing. Detective Stone called that afternoon to say he'd arranged for a forensic analyst to look at my phone and my father's if we could get it. Safia Webb worked out of a small office downtown and had me sign a bunch of forms before she cloned my phone onto her computer. She plugged it into this black box thing and told me the software would search for deleted messages, hidden apps, anything that might show contact between Jenna and my father. The whole process took about an hour of me sitting there watching progress bars move across her screen while she explained that recovery could take a few days depending on what was buried in the data. My mother was going through the medicine cabinet when I got home, counting pills and checking dates on all the bottles. She held up her Ambien prescription and showed me it was short by exactly 10 pills, the same number of times I told her I felt weird after hanging out with Jenna. Her hands shook as she dumped the remaining pills into this metal lockbox she'd bought at the pharmacy on her way home from work. She installed it on the top shelf of the bathroom cabinet and set a code only she knew, then went through every other medication we had and locked those up too. Meanwhile, my father was having his own problems at work according to a text from his coworker who knew our family. He'd been showing up late almost every day since moving to the motel, and people were starting to notice he looked rough and distracted. His supervisor had already pulled him aside twice to ask if everything was okay, and my father just mumbled something about personal issues. The coworker said the supervisor made a note in my father's file about his performance dropping, and that another warning would mean a formal review. 3 days later, Detective Stone called to say my father had agreed to come in for a formal interview and asked if I wanted to watch from the observation room. I drove to the station with my stomach in knots and sat in this small dark room with a one-way mirror looking into the interview room. My father walked in wearing the same wrinkled work shirt I'd seen him in days ago and sat down across from Detective Stone, who offered him coffee and asked if he wanted a lawyer present. My father said no to both and just stared at his hands folded on the metal table. Detective Stone started with basic questions about how long he'd known Jenna, and my father gave these short, vague answers about her being my friend since we were kids. When the detective asked about the birthday party 2 years ago, my father said he remembered the party but not any specific conversation with Jenna in the garage. Detective Stone pushed harder, asking if there was ever any physical contact, any messages, any encouragement of her feelings. My father kept saying variations of, "I don't recall," and "not that I remember," which made him look guilty as hell even to me. The detective showed him printed screenshots from Jenna's diary, and my father's face went pale, but he still insisted she must have made it all up. When Detective Stone tried to get Jenna to come in for her side of the story, she refused through her lawyer and said she'd only talk if granted immunity. Instead, she sent me this encrypted email through some secure app talking about promises my father had made to her, and how she had proof he'd initiated everything. I forwarded it straight to Detective Stone without even reading the whole thing, because seeing her name in my inbox made me want to throw my phone across the room. Safia Webb called 2 days later saying she'd found something interesting in my father's iCloud backup that had synced before he deleted stuff from his actual phone. She'd recovered fragments of text messages from 3 months ago between him and an unsaved number that turned out to be Jenna's. Most were corrupted, but she pulled out 2 clear ones where my father wrote, "We can't do this," and another saying, "Don't text me here," which proved at minimum that some kind of communication had happened. She said she was still working on recovering more, but these were enough to show contact existed. My next therapy session with Yvette was brutal, because I spent the whole hour crying about losing my best friend and my trust in my father at the same time. She had me do this exercise where I wrote down what each of them was responsible for versus what I was blaming myself for, helping me see that their choices weren't my fault, even though I kept thinking I should have noticed something was wrong. That weekend, I decided to go through old photos from my birthday party 2 years ago to see if I could spot anything weird. I uploaded them all to my laptop and went through them one by one, making notes of who was in each shot and when they were taken based on the timestamps. After about an hour, I noticed this 20-minute gap where neither Jenna nor my father appeared in any pictures, even though everyone else was there. My stomach dropped as I checked and rechecked, but they were both missing from every photo during that window. The metadata showed more specifically that they were both absent during the same 8-minute period, when the timestamps showed everyone was out in the backyard for the cake cutting. The garage would have been completely empty then, since everyone was outside singing happy birthday to me. I felt sick thinking about what might have happened while everyone was focused on me blowing out candles. My neighbor knocked on our door the next morning saying Detective Stone had asked her about any security footage she might have from the past few months. She mentioned her driveway camera had caught Jenna's car pulling up to our house at weird hours several times last month when we weren't home. She'd thought it was strange, but figured Jenna was just picking something up or dropping something off since we'd been friends forever. Detective Stone took copies of all the footage and added the timestamps to his growing file about Jenna's pattern of showing up when she thought no one would notice. The courthouse was only 20 minutes away, but my hands shook. So bad I had to pull over twice on the drive there. Filing the restraining order paperwork took 3 hours of sitting in uncomfortable plastic chairs and answering the same questions over and over to different clerks who kept sending me to different windows. The judge reviewed everything Detective Stone had submitted and granted the temporary order right away. 2 days later, a process server showed up at the dental office where Jenna worked as a receptionist and handed her the papers in front of her coworkers and patients in the waiting room. She called me 47 times that afternoon, but I didn't answer any of them. The relief hit me that night when I realized she couldn't legally come near me or contact me without going to jail. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number the next morning saying she needed to explain everything and that I was making a huge mistake believing my mother's lies. I screenshot it and drove straight to the police station where Detective Stone added it to the file as evidence she'd already violated the order within 48 hours. He said this was good for our case because it showed she couldn't control herself even with legal consequences hanging over her. My weekly therapy appointment with Yvette was that afternoon, and we spent the whole time working on safety routines I could follow to feel more secure. She had me write down all my triggers like seeing Jenna's car, or smelling the perfume she always wore, or hearing certain songs we used to listen to together. We practiced breathing exercises where I'd count to 4 breathing in, and hold it for 4, and breathe out for 4, whenever I felt panic starting to build in my chest. She taught me this grounding technique where I'd name 5 things I could see and 4 things I could touch, and 3 things I could hear, and 2 things I could smell, and 1 thing I could taste to bring myself back to the present when my mind started racing about what Jenna might have done to me all those nights. My mother met my father at a coffee shop downtown 3 days later with the printouts of the recovered text messages Sophia had pulled from his old phone backup. She told me later that he sat there stirring his coffee for 5 minutes without saying anything while she waited. He finally admitted he'd kissed Jenna once in the garage at my birthday party, and that they'd texted back and forth for a few weeks after, but he swore he ended it when he realized how wrong it was. My mother asked him to move out that same day, and he packed 2 suitcases and his toolbox from the garage and checked into a motel. Within a week, he'd signed a lease on a 1-bedroom apartment across town near the industrial district where rent was cheaper. The security deposit and first month's rent wiped out most of their savings account, and my mother had to cancel the cable and gym membership to make the mortgage payment. I went back to the gym the following Monday trying to get back to normal, but everyone stared at me when I walked through the doors. People whispered behind the weight racks and pointed when they thought I wasn't looking. My 2 regular personal training clients both canceled their sessions that week, saying they'd decided to work out at home instead, but I knew the real reason. I kept my head up and finished my workout, but sat in my car afterward crying so hard I couldn't see to drive home for 20 minutes. Detective Stone called me that Thursday, saying he'd met with the district attorney who reviewed all the evidence and agreed we had enough for harassment and trespassing charges that would probably stick. The poisoning charge was harder because we needed more proof that Jenna had actually put the pills in my drinks on purpose, and not just that the pills were in my system. He said the recorded phone call they were planning might help with that if she admitted anything about drugging me. Sophia sent over her technical report about the photos on Jenna's phone 2 days later, showing that every single timestamp matched exactly with the nights Jenna had slept over and the times the nanny cam showed her in my parents' bedroom. The photos had location data embedded in them that proved they were taken in our house, and the metadata showed they hadn't been edited or altered in any way. Anne from Urgent Care overnighted an official letter with all the chain of custody documentation for the blood test and smoothie sample my mother had brought in. She included the lab certification showing they were an accredited facility and outlined their testing procedures and how they'd maintained the samples properly. Each new piece of evidence made everything more real, and my stomach hurt constantly thinking about how many times Jenna had violated our trust. That Saturday morning, I woke up to my phone buzzing nonstop with notifications from friends asking if I'd seen what Jenna posted online. She'd written this long story on social media about being falsely accused and harassed by a jealous family who couldn't accept that someone had genuine feelings. She didn't use our names, but anyone who knew us would know exactly who she meant. Within an hour, mutual friends were picking sides and messaging me, asking for my version of events or telling me they couldn't believe what was happening. Some people said they'd always thought Jenna was weird, and others said my family must be lying because Jenna would never do something like that. My phone wouldn't stop ringing with people wanting details and gossip, and I finally just turned it off and went for a run to clear my head. My legs burned as I pushed myself harder around the neighborhood loop, trying to outrun the mess my life had become. When I got home, Yvette called asking if I wanted to move our session up since she had a cancellation that afternoon. I drove to her office still sweaty from my run and collapsed onto her couch explaining how everyone online was picking sides and demanding details. She pulled out a worksheet about harm reduction, and we went through each social media platform, discussing the emotional cost versus benefit of staying connected. Her pen scratched across paper as she wrote down my answers about feeling attacked every time I opened an app. We decided together that deactivating everything would give me space to heal without constant judgment from people who didn't know the full story. I sat in her office using my phone to systematically shut down each account while she watched and reminded me this wasn't running away, but choosing peace. The relief was instant when the notifications finally stopped buzzing. 2 days later, I found a thick envelope shoved under my apartment door with my father's handwriting on the front. Inside was a 3-page letter written on yellow legal pad paper, where he admitted to crossing boundaries with Jenna without making excuses. He wrote that he'd failed as a parent and understood if I never wanted to speak to him again. The paper was wrinkled in spots like he'd been crying while writing it. He acknowledged the harm he'd caused our family and said he was starting therapy to understand why he'd made such terrible choices. There was no request for forgiveness, just acknowledgement of what he'd done wrong. I folded the letter and put it in my desk drawer, not ready to process it yet. Detective Stone called the next morning saying he'd arranged a recorded phone call between my father and Jenna to potentially get more evidence. He wanted me at the station while it happened in case we needed to adjust strategy based on what she said. I sat in a small observation room watching through glass as my father sat at a metal table with recording equipment while the detective dialed Jenna's number. My father's hands shook as he held the phone and followed the script the detective had given him about wanting to talk things through. Jenna's voice came through the speakers immediately aggressive, demanding to know why he was calling after denying everything. He stayed calm and said he felt bad about how things ended and wanted to understand her perspective. She started crying and talking about how she'd given me what she called the blue ones whenever she wanted quiet time with him. The detective's eyes widened and he scribbled notes as she described crushing up pills and mixing them into my drinks. She said she only did it so they could have privacy without me interrupting their special moments together. My stomach churned hearing her admit so casually to drugging me like I was just an inconvenient obstacle to remove. The detective gave my father a thumbs up to keep her talking while the recording captured every word. She went on about how my father had promised they'd be together once I was asleep, and how she'd wait for the pills to work before going to his room. When the call ended, Detective Stone said that admission about the Ambien was huge for building the criminal case against her. He immediately called the district attorney who'd been waiting to hear if we'd gotten anything useful from the recorded conversation. Within 3 days, the district attorney's office prepared formal charges for harassment, trespassing, and unlawful surveillance based on all our evidence. The poisoning charge would remain under review while they transcribed the recorded call and verified the admission met legal standards for prosecution. The paperwork was thick with detailed counts of each violation, including dates and times from the nanny cam footage. A week later, Detective Stone called to say Jenna's parents had hired a lawyer who was already reaching out about a possible plea deal. They wanted her to get counseling instead of jail time, and were willing to have her plead to lesser charges if we'd agree. The lawyer sent over a proposal that included mandatory therapy, community service, and extended probation in exchange for dropping the more serious charges. I met with the prosecutor who explained our options and said we had strong enough evidence to push for jail time if we wanted. The decision felt impossible because part of me wanted her punished, but another part just wanted this nightmare to end. My father asked to meet with me the following week and suggested having Yvette present as a mediator to keep things productive. We sat in her office on opposite sides of the room while I laid out strict boundaries for any future contact between us. I told him he could text me once a month to check in, but I wouldn't promise to respond every time. No surprise visits, no showing up at my gym, and absolutely no contact unless I initiated it first. Yvette helped us write everything down so there'd be no confusion about what I needed to feel safe. My father agreed to everything without argument and signed the paper Yvette had prepared listing all the boundaries. Meanwhile, my mother met with a divorce attorney to explore her options, but decided on legal separation first to protect assets while she figured things out. She started her own therapy with someone who specialized in betrayal trauma and went twice a week to process everything. The separation paperwork would take weeks to finalize, but at least gave her some legal protection while she decided on next steps. 2 weeks later, we had the restraining order hearing at the courthouse where I had to testify about Jenna's behavior. The judge reviewed all the evidence, including the photos, the drug test results, and the transcript of her admitting to drugging me. She granted a 1-year restraining order requiring Jenna to stay at least 500 feet away from me at all times. The order also mandated that Jenna surrender all photos and recordings she had of my father and undergo court-ordered counseling. Jenna sat at the defendant's table crying while her lawyer argued she was just a confused young woman who'd made mistakes. The judge wasn't sympathetic and said the evidence showed a clear pattern of dangerous behavior that required intervention. That same week, my father's employer called him in for a meeting after somehow hearing about the situation through small-town gossip. They issued him a formal warning and required him to complete a workplace ethics training program within 30 days. His supervisor made it clear that another incident of any kind would result in immediate termination. My father had worked there for 15 years, but now everyone looked at him differently when he walked through the shop. 3 weeks later, the prosecutor called to say Jenna had started her court-mandated therapy sessions, and her therapist had already reached out about concerning patterns. The therapist explained during a conference call that Jenna spent the entire first session describing how she would watch my father sleep, calling it romantic when it was clearly obsessive fixation behavior that needed serious intervention. That same afternoon, our neighbor from 2 houses down knocked on our door holding a USB drive with security footage from the past 6 months. She'd noticed Jenna's car parked down the street at weird hours, and her motion-activated camera had caught Jenna walking past our house at least 15 times between midnight and 4 in the morning. The prosecutor said this gave them probable cause for a search warrant, which the judge signed within 2 days. I watched from my car as 4 officers went into Jenna's apartment with boxes and evidence bags while she stood in the parking lot crying. They came out 3 hours later with a shoebox they'd found under her bed containing 2 of my father's work shirts, a pair of his boxers, and over 50 printed photos of him sleeping that she'd taken with her phone. The evidence log also listed a bottle of my mother's perfume and one of my old hairbrushes she must have taken months ago. Everything got photographed and cataloged at the station, while Jenna's lawyer tried to explain it away as misguided affection. 2 days later, her lawyer called the prosecutor about a plea deal because the evidence was too overwhelming to fight. They offered harassment and criminal trespass charges with 2 years probation if she accepted mandatory counseling and agreed to extend the no-contact order. The prosecutor explained to me that jail time was unlikely for a first offense anyway, and this guaranteed she'd get help while staying away from us. Jenna signed the papers at the courthouse the following Monday, while I sat in the hallway trying not to throw up from anxiety. My father finally provided his complete written statement to the prosecutor that week, sitting in their office for 4 hours typing out every detail. He admitted to kissing Jenna once in the garage at my birthday party 2 years ago and exchanging inappropriate texts for 3 weeks before cutting off contact. The statement confirmed he'd told her it was wrong and there had been zero contact since he ended things. He took full responsibility for crossing boundaries, but maintained he never encouraged her surveillance or the drugging. My mother started attending a support group at the community center for partners dealing with infidelity and betrayal. She went every Tuesday and Thursday evening and slowly stopped obsessing over checking cameras and gathering more evidence against Jenna. The group leader helped her focus on her own healing instead of staying stuck in investigation mode. She came home from meetings looking tired but somehow lighter, like she was finally letting go of the need to control everything. We spent a whole weekend upgrading our home security with new deadbolts on every door and repositioned cameras that covered every angle of the property. The alarm company came out to change all the codes and add extra sensors to the windows. I helped my father install motion lights around the garage and backyard, while my mother labeled all the new keys. For the first time in months, I actually slept through the night without waking up in panic wondering if someone was in the house. During my therapy sessions with Yvette, I started writing letters to Jenna that I knew I'd never send. Page after page of anger about the betrayal, the drugging, the lies, and the 15 years of friendship she'd destroyed. Yvette had me read them out loud during our sessions to process the grief and rage. She kept them in my file and used specific phrases I'd written to help me work through the trauma. Some days I wrote 10 pages, other days just a few sentences, but it helped get the poison out of my system. My father started his own weekly therapy with someone who specialized in boundary issues and inappropriate relationships. He also asked if we could meet for coffee once a month in public places to slowly rebuild some kind of relationship. Our first meeting was at a Starbucks downtown, where we sat at opposite ends of a small table, barely making eye contact. He talked about work, and I talked about the gym, and we both avoided mentioning Jenna, or my mother. The conversation felt forced and uncomfortable, but at least we were trying. We agreed to meet again the following month at a different coffee shop. Meanwhile, my mother joined a book club at the library and started taking morning walks with 3 women from the neighborhood. She'd leave at 7 sharp with her walking shoes and water bottle, coming back an hour later with actual color in her cheeks. The book club met Wednesday nights and she'd actually read the books, making notes in the margins and bringing homemade cookies to share. She was building a whole identity beyond just being the betrayed wife dealing with her husband's mess. The walking group expanded to 5 women who decided to sign up for a charity 5K together. 2 weeks later, we sat in the courthouse waiting room while the prosecutor went over Jenna's plea agreement one more time before the judge signed off on it. The terms were clear: 2 years probation with monthly compliance check-ins at the probation office, mandatory therapy twice a week for the first 6 months, then weekly after that. And the no-contact order would be extended from 1 year to 3 full years, covering me, my mother, and my father. The judge asked Jenna if she understood all the conditions, and she nodded while her lawyer whispered something in her ear. She had to surrender her passport and couldn't leave the state without permission from her probation officer. The whole thing took less than 20 minutes, but my hands were shaking the entire time. Walking out of the courthouse, my mother mentioned we needed to talk about money because the legal bills were piling up faster than we expected. Between her divorce attorney, the criminal case costs, and all our therapy sessions, we'd burned through most of their savings already. She'd gotten quotes from 3 different dealerships for her SUV, and the best offer would cover about half of what we still owed. I helped her clean out the car that weekend, finding old receipts and hair ties and a coffee mug I'd given her for Mother's Day 3 years ago. The buyer came Monday morning and drove away while my mother stood at the window watching until it turned the corner. She didn't cry, but her shoulders slumped like something heavy had settled on them. We started carpooling to save gas money, and I picked up extra shifts at work to help with groceries. 3 days after selling the car, I finally went back to the gym for the first time since everything happened. My membership had auto-renewed, but I hadn't set foot inside in over 2 months. The girl at the front desk asked where I'd been, and I just said I'd been busy. I brought my own water bottle with a lock-top lid and didn't accept any offers to share protein shakes or pre-workout drinks from the regulars who used to train near me. When someone offered me a sip of their energy drink between sets, I said no thanks and moved to a different machine. My old workout partner tried to chat, but I kept my earbuds in and focused on my form. Each visit got a little easier, and by the 3rd week I was back to my regular schedule, just with new rules about what I'd accept from people. The following Tuesday, we all sat in a beige therapy office for our first family session together. My parents sat on opposite ends of the couch while I took the chair between them. The therapist laid out communication guidelines. No interrupting, no bringing up past grievances without connecting them to current feelings, and everyone had to use I feel statements instead of accusations. My father kept clearing his throat and my mother kept checking her phone until the therapist asked her to put it away. We spent most of the hour just establishing what we each wanted from these sessions. My mother wanted accountability, my father wanted a chance to rebuild trust, and I wanted to stop feeling like I was drowning every time I thought about our family. We scheduled monthly sessions for the next year, and the therapist gave us homework to write letters to each other that we wouldn't send, just to practice expressing ourselves. That Friday night, my mother knocked on my bedroom door holding a small wooden box I recognized immediately. She sat on my bed and opened it to show my grandmother's rings nestled in the velvet lining. She said she wanted me to have them now, to keep in my own safe or safety deposit box, because she trusted me to protect them, and they should go to someone who deserved them. Her hands were steady as she passed the box to me, but her voice cracked when she said my grandmother would be proud of how I'd handled everything. I put the box in my desk drawer for the moment, and we sat there quietly until she squeezed my shoulder and left. Looking at the calendar, I realized 3 full months had passed since that horrible confrontation in the kitchen. My sleep was better, not perfect, but I wasn't waking up in panic anymore. My appetite had come back, and I'd gained back the weight I'd lost during the worst weeks. The constant knot in my stomach had loosened enough that I could get through most days without feeling sick. I wasn't healed or fixed or anywhere close to over it, but I was standing on more solid ground than I had been. My feet felt steady under me for the first time in months. My parents met at a coffee shop the next week to discuss their separation timeline and decided to extend it for a full year before making any final decisions about divorce. My father had been going to his therapy appointments every week without missing one, and his therapist had started holding him accountable for his choices in a way that seemed to be working. He'd stopped making excuses and started actually acknowledging what he'd done wrong. They agreed to keep the separation in place while they both worked on themselves. Saturday afternoon, I was folding laundry when my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, Jenna's voice came through speaking fast and desperate about how she needed to explain everything, how the plea deal wasn't fair, how she'd been forced to agree to things that weren't true. I hung up immediately and blocked the number, then grabbed my running shoes and headed out the door. My legs felt strong as I ran the 3-mile loop around our neighborhood, my breathing steady and controlled, my body doing exactly what I told it to do without any chemicals making me fuzzy or weak. All right, that's all from me today, folks. Thanks for letting me poke around and throw some questions out there with you all. It's always fun hanging out like this. Subscribe for more content like this.